voice into clinical trials right here in our backyard, the Community Coalition for Equity in Research. This project was spearheaded by Karen Emmons at the Harvard School of Public Health in collaboration with none other than Michael Curry. And we are thrilled to have leadership from the program here today in a discussion moderated by Carine Davila, who many of you will remember from last year. She is another of our wonderful coalition part-timers, though her real job is as a palliative care clinician at MGH. All right, over to you, Carine.
Thank you so much, Anna. We are incredibly excited to have leaders from the Community Coalition for Equity in Research with us here today, as it's so important to be hearing about some of the great work that they are leading to integrate community voices in research, starting more upstream. And so, as some of our, we've been hearing on the prior panel, there's really a known history of what I would call justified mistrust from community members in the medical community, and in particular in the research community. And Congress passed legislation in the early 90s to really increase diversity and inclusion of historically marginalized communities in research. But many studies since have shown that there's really limited impact of this legislation, seen again, kind of, most recently in these COVID-19 vaccine trials. We're delighted today to have with us Rebekka Lee, Albert Pless Jr., and Carolina Trujillo. Now, just a quick note for everyone, there may be some confusion given both that the Community Coalition for Equity in Research and our own organization, the Massachusetts Coalition for Serious Illness Care, both often use coalition in brief. But in this segment, coalition will be referring to the Community Coalition for Equity in Research that our invited speakers help lead. So I'm first going to turn it over to Rebekka Lee, who will introduce and share more about the coalition's work. Becca.
Great. Thank you so much for having us today. I'm really excited to be able to share this with my co-chairs, Carolina and Albert, who really helped lead this work. So you can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to ground you in where this is all coming from. So the Community Coalition for Equity in Research is based at Harvard Catalyst, our clinical and translational science center here, where our aim is really to increase the pace of adoption of evidence-based programs and policies. We try to align all of our work with community identified needs and interests, and the coalition is just one of the activities that we have towards that mission of our community engagement program. We also work collaboratively with partners across the state and are really interested in increasing the pipeline of well-trained individuals. And for the coalition, that means everything from junior investigators who might be starting their first study to a senior researcher who's never done community engagement, but realizes if I want to build equity into my work, I need to learn these skills. And so really the coalition embodies all of the main goals of our program. Next slide. The other thing I want to ground us in is this continuum of engagement. And we really believe at our program that community engagement isn't this yes, no. It's really, you can be engaging at different levels with different studies. And we want to be bringing people in the door who aren't doing the most community engaged stuff and really push them along. So we will take all kinds of research. We can take studies that really, truly understand their community and they need a little extra guidance, or we can take folks that are earlier on in their journey towards community engagement and equity that are maybe in this more inform and consult area where they're just dipping their toes into engaging with communities. I see the coalition as fitting really in this yellow box where we have bi-directional communication between our coalition members and our researchers that come to us with their pressing research projects. Next slide. So the Community Coalition began when we, during the COVID pandemic, we realized that researchers were coming to us really too little too late with issues of recruitment in their studies. This is something that had always been a problem, but really just ballooned during the pandemic. And so we realized there was a need for a source of high quality community input on research and trusted and trustworthy community partners who can share input on trials with their community. communities. So our solution is this standing trained community coalition. This is one of the major things. It's a group that comes together and is cohesive over a 2-year period. They commit to this work. And so it isn't just a one-time experience. It's this collective group that power has been amazing. And you'll hear from that later. And they provide feedback on research that really is focused on equity, as we've said, using community engaged research principles. Next slide. So there's 14 members of our coalition in this first 2-year period. We have co-created a health equity review rubric that really guides each of the reviews that we have researchers bring to us. We've conducted 14 reviews to date, and the types of research we've seen have been all over the board. So we've seen genetic studies, we've seen cardiovascular disease studies, mental health, COVID-19 in the very beginning. And we've engaged with researchers with varied years of experience, and really started with postdocs all the way through those senior researchers across all the Harvard major teaching hospitals and Harvard Medical School, Harvard School of Public Health. We've received very positive feedback from all the researchers in our evaluation, and also from the members themselves. So we've collected data from the members to make sure it's a meaningful experience for them. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of what we mean by our rubric. So our rubric is broken up into 4 different categories: the planning part of a research study, the recruitment and consent, the participation, and the dissemination. And what I've included here for you is just some exemplar items from that rubric. I found that this is one of the things that people want to sink their teeth into a little bit more. Really what we have people do is review a video and a 2-page description of every study before it comes through. And they're able to fill out this rubric to prepare themselves for a conversation with the researcher. Next slide. So finally, I want to show you all the smiling faces of who our coalition members are. You get to hear from Albert and Carolina today. You've heard from Michael earlier today, but it's an amazing group of people. We are statewide, which is really important. We're very racially and ethnically diverse. We come from public health and medical settings, but also from outside of the healthcare sector. And I think that's really powerful to have those different voices. You can see a lot of age diversity, LGBTQ folks, immigrants, local health department staff, just such a range of experiences. And with that, I'm going to have you hear a little bit more from members of the coalition in this brief video.
The Community Coalition for Equity in Research is a group of individuals we brought together from across the Commonwealth to help our researchers really think deeply about how they can bring more equity focus into their research.
It's about pulling people together to come to the table with their lived experience, with their insight on the communities that they live in and they advocate for, that they fight for, and then having them at the table with researchers. The
coalition comes together once a month. We have about 14 members. They review research in advance, so we ask the researchers to prepare a brief video. We have a fabulous facilitator who helps us kind of coordinate each session. And the coalition members take turns being reviewers or being observers of the review process.
When I think about the work I've been doing for 25 years almost with Black boys and men, I think it's a bridge there that I can create.
We come from different backgrounds professionally, different backgrounds racially, and we are in different fields. So that creates some opportunities for researchers to have diverse feedbacks and diverse recommendations how to improve on their research.
It's refreshing to hear so many other perspectives and to really reinforce the fact that nobody is the owner of the truth as a whole, that we all have a piece of it and that collectively we're much better than individually.
The coalition is a community voice.
The thing I would want researchers to know is that you shouldn't be afraid to do it. It's different to have scrutiny of your colleagues and your peers, right? So folks who've been immersed in research, who speak your research language, evaluating your approach to this particular project that you have. It's a whole other thing when you come to the community to be part of that process I think what they will find is that there's as much value in the community as there is in their colleagues.
It's not that it's a nice thing, it's an essential thing. And I think the researchers that have been working with us have really started to feel that and realize that. And I hope more and more will understand the value that this brings to their own science and the impact they can have.
Wow, what a really great overview around such valuable contribution that these voices can bring to make research better and more inclusive. In fact, here at the Coalition, we've been so inspired by this work that we think there would be real value in using this as a model to create a similar group for serious illness care related research a little bit more specifically. Just think about what it would be what an awesome resource it would be for researchers kind of out there in the audience really looking to improve serious illness care. So now I'd like to welcome fellow co-chairs of the Community Coalition for Equity and Research, Albert Pless Jr. and Carolina Trujillo, to our virtual stage. And I'll just ask them to introduce themselves as well.
So hi, I'm Carolina Trujillo, and I am the current executive director at Citizens In. It's a nonprofit in Peabody, Massachusetts. We deal with housing insecurity and food insecurity. Pretty excited to be here today with my fellow co-chair and talking about important issues that affect all of us. So.
Good afternoon, Albert Pless. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion for the town of Andover. For the last 20 years, I worked in public health at both Boston Health Commission and the Cambridge Health Department. Working with communities of color. So I'm excited about also sharing the stage with Carolina and Becca about talking about the coalition. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And so I just love to kind of kick off a conversation, and for other folks too, as you hear this develop, if there's questions that pop up, please feel free to drop them in the chat. But Carolina, I was hoping to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about who makes up the coalition? We saw some of the faces in the video, but if you could share more about, why is it important to bring together people from multiple identities?
So it's very important because the work that we are trying to do is really have that voice of the community represented. The coalition is a statewide, and it's basically designed very intentionally that way. And we have people from all backgrounds. We have activists, we have people from media. When I started in the coalition, I was involved with Essex Media Group. So that was the background that I was bringing to the coalition, and leadership, Latino leadership in the North Shore. People from public health, people who are activists, people who are educators. And I think that all of that was intentionally put together in order to be efficient in our perspectives. Everybody has a very different perspective that they get to share on the same issue. And I think that that's the richness of this coalition, that everybody gets to have their voice. And at the end, the goal is to have the community represented as broadly as we can have it, and have that community engagement piece and bring voice to the voiceless, which in most cases, as we've seen historically, it's been minority groups, disenfranchised groups, underserved groups, which coincidentally are our people, the people who are in this community coalition. So I don't know, Albert, if you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it. I mean, I think that's pretty much who we do represent with intentionality around representing those groups. I think that's the intent, to make sure those groups are represented, that we reflect the community that oftentimes marginalized and unheard. So yeah, I would just echo that. I think that's the intent of the coalition.
And something else that I wanted to share is that every like most of the work that it's done is very siloed. So the state has been divided, and people from the North Shore don't necessarily speak with people from the South Shore, and people from Boston are very Boston centric. Cambridge feels very affiliated to Boston through Harvard. So all the work they do is really either centric to their city, Cambridge, or just focusing on Boston. And I think that one of the goals of the coalition was also to bring all of those parts together for a common goal. So I think that it's interesting, when we had our first meeting in person, we had to pick a central location to meet, right? It was the equitable thing to do. Well, I had to drive 2 hours to get to the central location to meet. That's how spread out we are. So it's very telling. I didn't like to drive the 2 hours, but yet there I was.
Oh, thanks for sharing. I can't imagine anyone loves driving 2 hours, but I'm glad if it had to be equitable, at least it's kind of, you're creating your 2 hour circumference for everyone to join and participate.
Absolutely.
Becca, I was hoping to turn to you. Can you share more about how were group members recruited to the coalition? And, Carolina touched on this a little bit, but, what were specific kind of voices that you felt were really important to have represented as you kind of, as you and the group envisioned and really created this core group?
Great question. So we began recruitment 2 years ago, just about to the week, because we're just about the end of our first 2-year term. And the first time we did recruitment, we had this statewide focus that Carolina's talking about. I was really interested in making sure we had people, as I said before, from inside healthcare and public health and those outside voices. I have to say, I didn't know some of the different sectors who would hear about us and come in and be those outside voices. So it was a pleasant surprise when I saw some of the applications from people who were coming from organizations that I'd never really heard of or thought of. So I think we had a very broad net. We really recruited through our networks of community partners, not through our networks of academic partners. I think that's an important thing. I did have a few academics apply to be on the coalition, and I said, no, you're not who we're looking for. I'm so excited that you care about this work, but we're really looking for people who don't have that academic hat. And that is different than what most people think of. So really, I will say Albert was part of a community training program that I run here at the School of Public Health called Leaders in Health. I heavily recruited through that group of people, and then the people they knew, that really helped out. But it was really thinking about who are our connections, who are the 3-4 steps removed, and doing very broad outreach. And then once we had those applications, being very, as Albert said, intentional about, okay, how many seats do we want to have in each section of the state? And then how do we want to make sure that we bring those different diverse people together and create a cohesive group? I think that was an important thing as well. So just the intentionality of those first few meetings and that recruitment being something where some people in the room were going to know more than half the people because they're super connectors people, and some people probably knew nobody. And so how do we create that as well? So I think that was also a really important part. The other final little thing that I just want to make a plug for is age diversity is something we don't talk about very much, but I love that we have people from their then early 20s, I think now mid 20s, because we're a few years later, all the way through retirement. And I think people bringing in different lived experiences has been super helpful for getting different perspectives on research, because people are thinking about different types of participants. And I thought that was important in the beginning, but became even more important.
Thanks. So thanks so much for sharing that. And as you're talking, I'm seeing actually Stephanie popped in the chat. Is there a moment to plug? Are you in recruitment?
Yes, I wasn't sure if I could plug that yet. We are looking for new members. I will say I'm pleasantly excited to say that all of our current members who are coming to regular meetings, a few people had to roll off because of grad school and new jobs, but basically everybody has decided they want to come back for another term. So that means we have just a few spots for the people who have rolled off over the 2 years. So we'll have maybe 3 to 5 new members. I think coming up, our application is live on our website. I can make sure that the link gets put in the chat because if you do know people who would be interested, we'd love that.
Wonderful. Thanks. Yeah, I think definitely incorporating more and diverse voices and into the work that you're doing. A question for you, Albert. What has surprised you most about the research that you've reviewed, or perhaps about the researchers that you've met kind of in this coalition work?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I'm just going to piggyback a little bit. Well, I'm actually going to just answer a little bit of what Rebekka was getting to around the coalition itself. I think one of the, and it may have been mentioned by Carolina too, this richness of the coalition itself is its own culture in terms of, that coalition, which again, the power of having those who have worked in healthcare and those who have not, really being able to challenge each other really to make sure that we are in the best place in terms of our learning space. And so some folks who have done research before, work with researchers, really helping to educate those who have not, and really vice versa. So really, I think that culture is something that, as strong as that coalition is, it makes the work that we're doing research is that much stronger, and then that in the community much stronger. So I just wanted to kind of make that plug. But I think what surprised me, I think, is I think that we have had, as Rebekka kind of mentioned, just a range of researchers that have come before us, and someone who's worked in public health for over 20-something years and have interfaced with researchers along my journey. I think often, I know that a lot of researchers are trying to center equity in their work, and they just don't know how to do it. And so I think that really giving this portal for researchers to kind of come share with the group, to really be able to say, how can I do this best with communities that I want to do it with, best? How do I do that? And so I think that that's been attractive to researchers out there, ranging from, as Rebekka said, those who are, kind of working on, seasoned projects, or those who are just on the front end of a project. We just had a researcher that, for example, was on the total front of our project with an organization that we just were totally surprised as a coalition that they came to us, but they were such the early stage of thinking through who their community was, thinking through kind of the best approach. They didn't even have a dissemination plan. They didn't have all these things laid out, but they were leaning to us to help them develop this. And that's kind of where the power of this coalition exists, where we can take researchers from whatever spectrum they're at. If you've already flushed through your materials, you have your consent, you have all your dissemination plans, we can help you be able to think about what's the best way for that to actually now translate to community. And then in early research, is thinking through kind of who your target community could look like. So I guess in a short way, I guess I'm saying that, we've had a lot to come before us. I don't think I was so much surprised. This last researcher came to us, I was a little surprised about that in terms of like,
I was very surprised about that one.
That was a great, right? That was an interesting one. It challenged us, I think, as a coalition to think about, look at the reach that we can have in community. We think about, kind of like being able to help inform this organization to actually do their work in a broader way. So again, I'm not speaking to that, Rebekka, because I'm not sure if we can, but
I think you can.
We can. It was the Census Bureau, and the Census Bureau came before us as a researcher thinking about how they can look at the underreported and how that impacts services that go to particular communities. So really thinking with us around how the best way to make sure that they're addressing that underreported and its impact against a broader community. So that surprised me first as the researcher, the Census Bureau, and really and how they came to us, but also just being able to think about that type of research. It's not typically the traditional research that we may have seen through our portal. So again, I was long-winded, but I just wanted to say that was really probably Carine, the thing that probably surprised me most.
Wow, that's so interesting. The breadth as you're reflecting of kind of where you're able to have and create influence. And you touched on this a little bit, Albert. I wanted to follow up that there's obviously researchers can be at many different stages in their own work. And it sounds amazing that you're able to kind of provide feedback. It seems like at different stages for researchers. Do you find, is there kind of an optimal time that they might be able to connect or be able to kind of, really have the richest consultation and engagement experience with the coalition?
Yeah, and I'll jump in with a question. I would love for Carolina and Rebekka to jump in with this one as well, because, I think obviously, we want to best work with the researcher on the front end of their project. So when they are when they have, they may have just kind of designed some of the materials, they may just be really in that beginning stage. I think that's when we could begin to feel like we have the most influence on them. I think when things are already fleshed out, it's a little harder to really be able to kind of pull some things back. So I'll just pass it to my colleague, but I think that's where I see the best influence at early stages.
So we've noticed that the further along you're in your process, and if you already have an IRB approval and all that, there's going to be a lot of difficulty of you coming back and changing protocol if you already have approvals done. So we've noticed that the sooner you start working with the coalition, really pointing out the things that you can they can actually enhance your proposal to gather funding, right? To secure funding, and also add things that it blows my mind, the assumptions that some researchers have about the community and how they believe that they're going to come in and they're going to be these white saviors or research saviors, and everybody's going to want to talk to them just because they're from an organization. And that couldn't be more far from reality, right? And you do have to make sure that you have, stipends included in your budget, that you're really thinking about language capacity, that you're really, we have a coalition member who's Asian, and I always say, she always brings the greatest perspective about the different languages that she has in her culture. Like, so what, have you looked into the data and see what community is there? Because you're talking about Asians, and there's like 10, 14, 17 languages within that community. Same with Latinos. Spanish is the same, but Latinos from Colombia speak very different than Latinos from Guatemala and from Dominican Republic. So how are you going to build your materials? Who's going to help you and support you to do that, to be sensitive and culturally sensitive? Like, all of these discussions come as part of the conversations that we have with the researcher. And the sooner you can get to that, I think the better hashed out your project might be, and the more interesting, I believe, to any funding sources you might have, because you're really taking that equity lens and putting it to every aspect of how you're going to be engaging in community. That's our belief, and that's how we go by it. Of course, if you're we had a project that came in initially, embedded all the comments. Now he's been approved. Now he came back and said, all right, this is where I'm at. Now I have to develop materials. How do I do that? What is the best practice for this? And then some of the coalition members have been really interested in the work, because that's the other part. There is a component that if you're interested in this topic, the researcher gets to invite you to be part of that research, like, an advisor to that research. And there are some coalition members that have been advisors to some of the researchers that, are conducting these things. So I think that that's another huge win for the researcher, that you get to engage with experts in the field who are going to help you and lead you through whatever engagement plan you have with community. So.
Wow, that's so amazing, and so interesting to hear too, that you can kind of engage with researchers at different stages. Kind of, it sounds like once they're connected, they're in and can leverage, help and leverage the resources and knowledge of the coalition to really help them kind of, from early to later on, to make their own research richer, more equitable, more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Carolina, I wanted to ask, you mentioned language, and I think that's so important. And I'm just, curious if you can share a little bit more about, in what ways have you seen that language is such a critical component of the research that you've reviewed?
So language plays a critical role when you're talking about cultural sensitivity. And if you're talking about, depending on where you're going to conduct your research, you have to be sensitive of what the community looks like. What is the makeup of the community? And your materials have to reflect the makeup of the community, from engagement all through consent forms, through everything else. So even when you are doing the research itself, so you have all these materials, you're out there, and now you're engaging with people. You have to really understand what the background culture is. And I think that in what we've seen is these are some of the things that we have emphasize to our researchers. You have to find people in the community that can help guide those conversations, that can be your gatekeepers, your champions, that can help you have these difficult gathered of information with people who want to participate and they feel comfortable. So language plays a significant role within the intervention itself, from the beginning, from recruitment phase, all the way to delivering results, because that's the other part that, you know, we emphasize with the people who have been, who have brought their work in front of us. Since we are the voice of the community, we have to make sure that that it's a transactional approach, that the community is going to win as a result of whatever work. And if you didn't think of that, we're bringing it to you. We're volunteering the information. All right, now you have all this information. Great, you got all this funding, or you got an A in your project from school. What's in there for the community? How are you going to disseminate your information, your gatherings? How is that going to transform into any change in the community? And I think that that's another part of this coalition that's very particular to it, that we are all, in a way, are leaders and activists for our people. And we're not, you know, we're unapologetic about it. And we are very open to researchers and say, you know what, I'm here to think about this last one, the Census Bureau one. You know, there was a lot of history there, and people were very open about their experiences with the Census Bureau from going back to the 50s and 60s. You know, some member was talking about that. And I was pretty open about my concern for undocumented people and how the government just flips on this community however they want, depending on the administration. Like DACA is a clear example of that. So those are conversations that are difficult. But at the end of the day, I want to make sure that I bring that to the coalition. And I want to make sure that the researcher has that as part of the work on how he's framing or she's framing the intervention to gather data or whatever it is that they want from the community.
I really love that. And I really love the point that you're making that, you know, obviously in many ways, this is a resource for researchers, but it's also turning back and making sure that researchers are focused on kind of the greater purpose. It's not about kind of getting the grant or submitting the paper. It's what are we doing this for? And how are you designing the work that you're doing to ensure that it's going to have the lasting impact on the community that you're trying to help?
That is so beautifully said, Carine. Thank you so much. That's perfect. That's exactly what we hope. That's what we aspire to do.
Well, that's awesome. So I'm already getting some questions from the audience, and one of them I do want to go ahead and bring to the group here. It really, you know, it seems like this could be a very valuable process for any kind of quality improvement initiative or even program implementation, separate from what we might call kind of classic research. Do you review things like that, or kind of are there any bounds to the types of researchers or projects that you're willing to hear?
I'll jump in first and say, so far there have not been bounds. If people are interested, they come to us first for kind of a mini meeting to see if their project is well aligned enough with the types of feedback we give. And then I think we're really open. And so this last example that we gave was pretty different than most of the other research we've seen, but I think you're right. A lot of these concepts could really be woven into evaluations. We've thought about also working with local health departments or nonprofits. They're doing evaluations of their own work. That's not capital R research with an R01 or something, but we can really help with our rubric in lots of different ways. So right now, there are no bounds from my perspective, but anyone else?
No, I couldn't agree more.
Go ahead.
No, I couldn't agree more. That was what I was going to say. Just validating.
And I'm going to validate too. And I'm just going to say just two things. One, I think the beauty about being on the front end of a coalition, as we are, you know, we're kind of building the ship as we're sailing it, which is actually really good, you know, because we're learning. The coalition itself is learning. Remember that culture of the coalition. We're learning in terms of a best practice on how we can best get the best out of that coalition. Remember, Rebekka mentioned that feedback that we gave to ourselves around kind of like how do we best the QI around that, and how do we best deliver this out to researchers. And so I think the good is to be on the front of that because we're learning, we're documenting our progress along the way so we can best, so yeah, so I would echo what Rebekka said and Caroline said. I think there are no bounds right now. I think, but the beauty thing is make sure we are in the best position to whenever someone that comes before us that we're not with the big traditional research are, that we're in the best position to get them feedback.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, hopefully it's, others are hearing about it. I know I'm excited and might be reaching out to you guys myself, but, what are some of the biggest mistakes or biases that perhaps you're seeing kind of over and over as you're reviewing research projects that researchers are making? Carine, I know you talked a little bit about assumptions earlier. What is it that you're seeing? Are there any kind of recurring themes?
I'll just jump in again, this is a good one, Rebekka and Caroline, so we can think about this, but I'm just going to get it jumping just because I don't want to, I think one of the things, again, that we're seeing potentially as a theme, and it's not, maybe it's just out there, is the clarity around your dissemination plan. And again, when we have these researchers come before us, again, it's so critical. If you have a dissemination plan, now some researchers, they aren't there yet, that's fine. I'm not talking about those, but the ones who have a dissemination plan, have you thought about really engaging the community and partners and things like that with the dissemination plan to make sure the plan can be sustained, and I think this really helping the researchers think about the reach of their dissemination, and I think there's needs to be thought into that. And that's also what Caroline was speaking earlier around when we work with the researchers on the front end, helping them think about who your partners are, roles that are appropriate, roles that, kind of are kind of entrenched in the communities you want to reach to. And that helps the dissemination plan as you engage those partners to actually now get to carry out this plan and sustain it. So that's one thing we're seeing, some of the weakness in the dissemination plans.
Oh, great. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. And so, maybe I'll just wrap up and ask Rebekka just one more question. What lessons have you learned, or really any of you, about establishing a coalition like this? And do you have any advice for us as we kind of think about trying to set up a similar one?
So one thing we haven't talked about yet, I mentioned it very briefly, is all the work that we did up front to really build a cohesive group and how important that was. I think that's what makes this unique compared to other mechanisms I've seen of giving community input on research, is we spent a good amount of time up front kind of level setting, for a better that term I think is what I would use, making sure everybody felt confident asking questions about the different types of research terminology they were going to hear, learning from one another. We've really emphasized learning from one another. So when we were doing a genetic study, lifting up the experience of one of our coalition members who'd help recruit for all of us and tell us her perspective and also the researcher perspective. So I think finding those opportunities for learning from other coalition members, building a collective identity of the coalition, having them co-develop this rubric. And so it really feels like there's ownership. It doesn't feel like there is ownership. We went through this process of developing it together. And so I think all that upfront work of really having the group gel, be a trusted entity, and this observer researcher role that Karen mentions in the video, of having an opportunity in every meeting at the end to have the people who were in that observer role say, boy, when you said that was like amazing. I loved how you put that. Like having that feedback for one another that's really positive, and also being able to process maybe some of the harder parts of that particular review just builds us as a group together. And I think that's just been phenomenal, and I really encourage others to do that.
And may I add something? Do we have like a second to add? So
go ahead.
Rebekka usually doesn't give herself any credit for the actual work she does. In order to have this project moving along and this coalition being functional and effective, you need a strong person on the backside, like Rebekka does, to keep us as a moderator, to keep us moving along, to streamline thought processes, to gather information that's relevant, to assign roles when, you're the one who's going to do this, you're the one who's going to do question 2. So when we actually meet with the researcher, she's like the coach. She's already lined up of who's going to be speaking, in what order, what are we going to be saying. And I think that that's a critical role. Otherwise, believe me, each of us has so many things to say that we would spend days not having any concrete thought on what we were going to actually deliver on, because everybody has such a amount of intelligence and life experience, and everything is so relevant that you do need that one person who's that funnel, who is able to gather everything, synthesize, make it strategic, give it an order, and then make the coalition deliver it. So she never gives herself credit, but I always make sure that we give her credit, because her job is, I think, critical. And since you're kind of like thinking of replicating this, you need a person like Rebekka. You need your own Rebekka, a different Rebekka.
I know. I was going to say, we need a Jerry, we need a Rebekka, we need a lot of folks from the wisdom that we've learned here today. Well, I just want to say thank you all so much to all of you, our amazing panelists, for such a rich discussion today. And I know I've certainly learned a lot, and hopefully our audience members have as well too. So thank you so much.